Okay, we're going to get started. In accordance with the State Sunshine Law of New Jersey, adequate notice of this meeting of Hillsborough Township Board of Education was provided on November 7th, 2019 to the Hillsborough Beacon and Courier News. May I have a roll call, please?
Sure. Mrs. Eldridge Howard?
Here.
Mr. Gillette?
Here.
Dr. Harris? Mrs. Maroon?
Here.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Here.
Dr. Soussaint?
Here.
Mrs. Stats?
Here.
Mr. Hio?
Here.
And Mrs. Haas. We have a quorum.
Okay, we will hold the Pledge of Allegiance until we open the regular session. Whereas the Open Public Meeting Act, Chapter 231 of the laws of 1975 provides that a public body may exclude the public from that portion of a meeting of which the public body discusses certain matters for which confidentiality is required as permitted in Section 7B of the Act. Resolved by the Board of Education of the Township of Hillsborough in the County of Somerset and State of New Jersey as follows. The matters to be discussed are a personnel matter and update on negotiations with the Hillsborough Education Association. The matter is discussed in executive session, shall be disclosed to the public when the need for confidentiality no longer exists. May I have a motion to move into executive session?
So moved.
Thank you, Chris.
Second.
Thank you, Joyce. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay. We're in executive session. We'll be back at 7:30. Thank you.
Meeting to order. This is the Monday, November 11th, 2019 meeting of the Hillsborough Board of Education. We've completed our executive session, so I'd like to have a roll call, please.
Surely. Ms. Eldridge Howard?
Here.
Mr. Gillette?
Here.
Dr. Harris?
Here.
Mrs. Maroon?
Here.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Here.
Dr. Soussaint?
Here.
Mrs. Stats?
Here.
Mr. Trujillo?
Here.
And Mrs. Haas.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Will everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. All right. We have two sets of minutes that have to be. Approved. One is the executive session from October 28th, 2019. May I have a motion and second to approve the minutes of October 28th for executive session?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions, comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Motion passes.
Great. I'll take a motion and a second to approve the regular meeting minutes for the meeting held on October 28th, 2019.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Motion passes.
Okay. I acknowledge the receipt of various pieces of correspondence that are listed in the agenda. And I guess I will go on to the...
May I make a comment after you?
Sure.
Make it now?
Go ahead.
Okay. I was looking through the
Speak into the microphone.
Can you hear me? Okay. I was looking at the correspondence, like we all do, and I was concerned about a certain bus company who's always late. And what really concerned me more than anything, it's impacting learning, student learning. The bus was supposed to come at 8:08, arrives at 8:35. So the student's first period was lost the first time, and maybe more than that. So I just have concerns. And because I had that concern, I spoke to Dr. Antunes, and she told me, Mr. Mahmood and Ashley, I believe, you're already on it.
Yes.
I'm so glad to hear that, because when you have to miss a class, and that's a problem.
If I may? Yes, I think Ms. Eldridge, thank you for bringing that up. And we have several correction measures that we have in place that we're working with internally. We plan on talking to the operations committee this Wednesday morning to talk to them about some solutions. The one thing that we will not tolerate as a school district is lateness from the contractors. We are implementing fines, and we're doing everything within our contract obligation that we can do to make sure that we prevent that from happening moving forward. But we have some ideas, and we have some suggestions that we're going to run by the Operations Committee, and we're hopeful moving forward that we can eliminate that situation in terms of buses being late.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to bring the public up to date on some other referenda that were voted in other towns other than Hillsborough on Election Day. Actually, there were a number of tax levy questions in various towns in Bergen County, Camden County, Gloucester County, and Middlesex County. And out of all of those, there were 3 approved and 4 rejected. In regard to construction proposals, however, there were 4 approved and 1 rejected. And significantly, since they are our neighbors, the Flemington-Raritan Regional School District had 2 referenda questions for $21,000 and $20,000, $20 million, and they both passed by a decent margin. And Verona and Essex County also had a $22 million and a $5 million proposal, and both of those were approved. And the one that was rejected was in Palisades Park. And that was for $61 million. But it was an interesting election day, and hopefully we will be able to have the same kind of favorable turnout on our referendum question on December 10th. So I just wanted to update everybody about that. There were a number of meetings that various members of the board went to last week with Dr. Antunes. We met with Senior Chapter A on Thursday. On Friday, we had coffee that we paid for at Cafe Brio. We being each of us individually, contrary to what you might be reading. And that was, that was a good session at Cafe Brio. We spent all day Sunday on negotiations, which I'll ask Chris to report on in a minute. But coming up on Tuesday, we have a Township Committee meeting on Tuesday night, as well as an HSA President's meeting. On Wednesday, we have a referendum forum, which we're going to hold in our conference room at the municipal building at 7 o'clock. And that will be the coffee with the superintendent, but at night for those who can't come to a morning meeting. On Thursday, we're meeting with Senior B at the municipal building, and that night the Somerset County School Board Association is also having their program on later start times for schools. And that's in conjunction with the Mercer County School Board Association, and that will be held down in Montgomery as a midpoint. So if anybody wants to go, you really need to register. It's free for board members. And Woods Road is now on Wednesday. Okay, Woods Road is also scheduled for that Thursday night. The following week, on Monday the 18th, we'll be at Orton Road School. On Tuesday the 19th, we'll be at Hillsborough High School and Sunnymead. And on Thursday the 21st, Triangle School. And Monday the 25th, we'll be at Starbucks from 9 o'clock to 10:30, buying our own coffee, as usual. And, there are additional dates, but I figured I'll give you like 2 weeks or so. And as you can see, Dr. Antunes has certainly embarked on a very aggressive meeting schedule so that we can reach as many members of the public as possible on this issue, because it is very important to the district, to all the students, to all the staff, that we be able to make these repairs in our school buildings. And tonight we'll obviously be having a presentation on that in short order. And I'd like to turn to Chris for a brief moment if you'd like to talk about negotiations. But
I was going to do it in committee reports, but
what's that?
I was going to do it in committee reports, but
Oh, well,
I can do
you
it.
would be the, okay.
Fine, I'll do it now. As Judy mentioned, we did have a session tomorrow, so just to summarize, The Hillsborough Township Board of Education and the Hillsborough Education Association were unable to reach a tentative agreement on a new 3-year contract after meeting for nearly 9 hours on Sunday, November 10th. Judy Haas, president of the board, stated, "We deeply value the contributions of our staff, and we presented what we believe to be a fair settlement offer." The meeting on Sunday was scheduled in an effort to avoid the delay and expense of a formal fact-finding hearing. Significant progress was made on nearly all outstanding issues, but regrettably, an agreement could not be reached on salary and the restructuring of tuition reimbursement. So at this point, we are waiting for a date from the fact finder to proceed to the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Going back to the referendum, I'd like to add, and unfortunately I can't do it in Spanish, but we've added Spanish translation to our website for all of the documents many of the documents, all the frequently asked questions and summary items and the most important items. So that is now available to people who speak only Spanish. And I'm getting bossed around here. Dr. Antunes would like me to read the statement that will be on the ballot, which I will do. The explanatory statement states that the projects, in order to ensure a safe, healthy, and secure learning environment and provide for facilities infrastructure needs, the board is seeking to undertake district-wide facility improvements, including, as applicable, heating and ventilation replacement, electrical upgrades and emergency lighting system replacement, masonry improvements, stucco improvements, interior renovations and finishes replacement, roof replacements, asphalt repaving, sidewalk and curbing replacement, air conditioning in certain areas which are currently not air conditioned, upgrade of security at all schools, including secure entry and security vestibule improvements at an aggregate cost not to exceed $35,416,740. The board anticipates financing the projects over a 20-year period. In regard to state funding for the projects, the state has agreed to contribute just over $14 million towards the cost of the $35.4 million project. All costs of the projects are available for the highest level of state funding. Actually, let me repeat that. All costs of the projects are available for the highest level of state funding. State funding will be in the form of debt service aid. The state funding is only available if the proposal is approved. Now, here's the proposal. The Board of Education of the Township of Hillsborough and the County of Somerset, New Jersey, is hereby authorized to A, undertake a school facilities project consisting of district-wide facility improvements, including, as applicable, heating and ventilation replacement, electrical upgrades and emergency lighting system replacement, masonry improvements, stucco improvements, interior renovations and finishes replacement, roof replacement, asphalt repaving, sidewalk and curbing replacement, air conditioning in certain areas which are not currently air conditioned, upgrade of security at all schools, including secure entry and security vestibule improvements, and B, expend and issue school bonds in an amount up to $35,416,740 on such projects. The state has agreed to provide debt service aid in the amount of 40% of the final eligible costs of the school facilities project. All of the project costs are final eligible costs. The local shares of the projects may be transferred among the projects. So that is the item that will be appearing on the ballot when people go to vote, I hope, on December 10th. So good? Okay. That would be my board president's report, and at this point, I would like to ask the board's approval for us to move forward item number 13.7.1, the appointment of an interim supervisor of science named Jeffrey Charney. And if we can take a vote on that, if I could have a motion on 13.7.1,
So
I would
moved.
appreciate that. Thank you, Chris. Second. Thank you. Yes, okay. Are there any questions or comments? Would you like to say anything? Okay. Roll call.
Ms. Eldridge Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Gillette?
Yes.
Dr. Harris?
Yes.
Mrs. Maroon?
Yes.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Yes.
Dr. Swasan?
Yes.
Mrs. Stats?
Yes.
Ms. Trujillo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Haas?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Welcome aboard. Thank you very much. And with that, I turn over to our esteemed superintendent.
Thank you. So Superintendent's Report, we'll start with our good news. When the New Jersey State Marching Band Championships were postponed due to rain on October 27th, the organization that runs the event asked Hillsborough to host a portion of the event on Wednesday, October 30th. Yes, just a couple of days after. After some really hard work for 5 days from our buildings and grounds crew, our band directors, our band parents, everyone pulled together and pulled off a wonderfully organized event. Our students performed great and earned a second place finish. The Raider Band also traveled to Washington, D.C. November 2nd and 3rd to participate in the Bands of America Regionals. All bands participate in a semifinal round and our band finished second. The top 10 groups are invited to perform a second time in the same day, and our band finished 5th. And the best part, our group earned the highest individual music score out of all groups. Congratulations. I'd like to share some information, some interesting information I received from Sodexo, our food service management company. Kathy Major, our general manager, shared that this September, the district made huge strides in reducing the use of styrofoam and waste. We have reduced our styrofoam usage by over 99%, and some of the changes include compartment trays that have been changed to 3 compartments that are biodegradable plates or paper boats. Styrofoam plates and bowls have been changed to either paper plates, paper bowls, or fiber plates. Plastic utensils are now biodegradable utensils. Plastic coffee stirrers are now wooden stirrers, and plastic straws have been eliminated district-wide. I'm also pleased to announce that the inaugural Hillsborough Business Advocate Business Appreciation Social held on November 7th, we had 2 of our schools recognized with the 2019 Community Partnership Awards. Congratulations, teachers, students, parents, administrators from Woods Road Elementary School and Hillsborough High School. That was a really fun event. There was a band at the beginning of the event, and many of the community partners were there, businesses and just local people, and the township was there as well. So it was a nice evening for our teachers and our principals. Lastly, I would like to take a moment to thank our veterans who celebrated Veterans Day with our school communities over the last week. This is a very special day for our students who are given the opportunity to show our deep appreciation to our veterans and to honor the commitments and sacrifices of those who have served in our military branches. Thank you to all veterans for your service to our country. I know that me and the administrative team attended several last week and today, and I know board members also attended several events. And the people, the veterans who come out, they tell stories. It's such a moving day, a moving time in the district. And the kids essentially lined either the hallways or today at Triangle, they were all in the all-purpose room. And the event is whose grandpas and grandmas and aunts and uncles and dads and moms. It's a very moving event. So if you didn't have a chance to go, I encourage you to try to go next year. And everybody leaves with a really great feeling. So that is the good news portion of the superintendent's report. And I would like to, let me bring up the referendum presentation. This has been on the calendar for quite a while. We have this is like our big referendum presentation this evening, where we have our professionals here and to answer any questions or whatever's necessary, whatever questions from the community we have. This will be on the website tomorrow, and so any questions that come up or anything, anybody can watch it at any time. Let me get this going. And what I'd like to do is just sort of open it up that this is our repair, replace, and revive referendum, sort of a different 3 R's. Instead of reading, writing, arithmetic, it's repair, replace, revive. And laughing at me. And some of the background for the referendum projects, which I believe Mr. Wozni is going to talk about, I just wanted to, or he put up that these are the age of our schools, anywhere from 21 years, which is Auten Road, they're the baby of the community, to 70 years old of Hillsborough Elementary School. And so as he goes through the presentation, and then Mr. Mahmood closes it at the end, anything that comes up, any questions you have, you can call us, you can reach out, the website is there for information, come out and see us, and we're happy to talk about it. So with that, Mr. Wozni. And please be sure to take a look at the posters as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Antunes, and good evening. I want to introduce a couple people with me tonight. We have Jamie Hunter and Brian Donnelly. They'll be at the forum on Wednesday night. Lisa Garb's also here, your bond counsel. She's going to speak about the tax impact portion of the presentation. And as I mentioned, Jamie and Brian will be in the district on Wednesday. So a little bit of background. As Dr. Antunes mentioned, the schools are old. You've been maintaining them for the past 70 years. In addition to these ages, some of the schools have been added on to over the years, and the reason that's important is because they're almost buildings built on top of buildings or next to buildings. So you've got different systems that are different vintages. So you may have heard that you replaced a roof section or you did some mechanical work in the past over the years, and you might be wondering why we're still doing that. It could be that just a certain portion of the building was worked on at that time, because some of the more recent additions are only 40 years old or 20 years old. But there's been no new construction in the district since Auten Road and a few additions 21 years ago. So on the next slide, we talk about how we got to the point where we're at. There was a facility condition assessment prepared by Aramac back in February of 2018. We were brought on as district architects and engineers in June of 2018, and we did an assessment of that report. Basically, we validated the information in that report. There was also a threat and vulnerability assessment prepared by the local and state law enforcement officials in October of 2018. And then from that time on, we met with the ops committee, and we prioritized these projects. We tried to pare down the cost. We tried to make sure that we were including in a possible referendum just projects that were eligible for the state aid. And after all these discussions, the conclusion was, which is something that we see with all our school clients, is that you have to do more than just maintain the buildings through your annual maintenance budgets. At some point, you have to have a larger referendum to tackle these large projects, because there's just not enough money in a typical school annual budget to fully maintain the buildings over a period of time. So we see our clients every 20 years or so having a referendum just to tackle the large roof projects, mechanical issues, and things that just can't be handled on an annual basis. And I do want to emphasize that all this work is work to the existing school buildings. There's no new construction as part of this referendum. No work at board offices, no work at the Buildings and Grounds building, no ball fields. This is all health and safety work. It's all 100% eligible for state funding because the state deems this as all very necessary work to be done. So on the next slide, we broke the projects down into various categories depending on building systems, starting with mechanical. And again, there has been work mechanically in the district over the years, but there are a lot of components to mechanical systems. You've got the boiler plant, and in some cases, for example, Amsterdam, even though it's one of the newer buildings, those boilers are reaching their useful life expectancy and they need to be replaced. There are terminal units like the one photograph in the top, that's at Woodfern. That's original to the construction of the building. These unit ventilators are at the point where they need to be replaced. The parts are no longer available. The energy efficiency codes have changed. The indoor air quality codes have changed for ventilation. So various code requirements make it necessary to replace this equipment when it gets this old. So we've got water piping, and again, the various components of a mechanical system. You've got the terminal units, which are located in every room. You've got the piping that reaches to those units from the boilers. And then you have controls. So a lot of the work that we're doing is controls so that this equipment that's going in is being used at the proper times, that it's energy efficient and controlled, so it's staying energy efficient. On the next slide, we've got electrical work. These are emergency lighting issues and exit signs. And again, they're just gradually, getting old over the years, and these are the types of, key systems that you don't want to wait until they fail. So we're making recommendations that they're replaced in schools. On the next slide, we've got exterior work. Again, a lot of the masonry, original to the construction of the buildings. You've got caulk joints that are failing that need to be recaulked. You've got masonry that needs to be repointed. EFIS, which is exterior insulating and finishing system. It's basically a synthetic stucco system. It's on this building. It's on a couple other buildings. It's gotten damaged over the years. Lacrosse balls are, something that we see at a lot of school districts. They hit the building, they put pockmarks in it, and it, besides, it's not just an aesthetic issue, but it allows water infiltration through those openings, and as soon as water gets in, hits that insulation that's behind that exterior hard coat, you have moisture. And then once you have moisture in there, you've got the, potential for mold inside the building. So all this exterior work is very important. The next slide, we cover interior work. Picture on the upper left-hand corner is at Hillsborough Elementary School. That is the floor of the boiler room. There's a fan room below that floor that no longer works as a fan room, but structurally this is something that needs to be taken care of. So that's in the scope of work. We've got a lot of ceiling systems that need to be replaced, interior doors that need to be replaced, toilet partitions. We've got floor tile, so there's a whole host of interior projects that are included in the referendum. The next slide, we have roofs. And again, some of the roofs have been replaced over the years, some have been repaired. We're only doing the roofs and the portions of roofs that really need to be done at this point. So we've got Auten Road, this school right here, the entire building, we're replacing the roof. The middle school, the same thing, the entire building, the roof is being replaced. At the high school, we've got the 500 wing, which is the most recent addition. That's ready to be replaced. And at Woodfern and Woods Road, we've got the rear wings of both of those schools. Again, they're newer buildings, but those roofs are at the point that they need to be replaced. On the next slide, we switch over to paving. And this is an issue that occurs at a lot of the buildings. It's to the point where it's a health and safety issue. You've got, potential tripping hazards. You've got, potholes that visitors to the school driving may be swerving out of the way to avoid that can create a potential problem. And then this is something that if you wait much longer, areas that could now just be milled and re-top coated at a lesser of a cost would have to have a full depth replacement. Once you start seeing the gravel in some of these potholes, you've got to dig out that whole section, the full depth of not just the pavement, but the substrate, and you've got to rebuild that from the topsoil back up again. So projects like this, if they're delayed much longer, they get to be much more expensive. So we've got a few slides of paving. And again, this happens at virtually all the schools. The last slide on the right is actually triangle. It's labeled triangle. It's actually the back of the middle school. I know you've done, like all the other systems, you've been doing things over the years. The front of the middle school was recently repaved, but we're doing the back of the middle school. There's also drainage issues. And I think you can see the catch basin there and the cracking there, which represents to me that there might be something below the drive there that is having a problem. So we look at all the drainage issues associated. And whenever we're doing pavement, we're looking at the curbing adjacent to the pavement and the sidewalks. Again, these are not just in the remote parts of the site, but some of these bad tripping conditions are at entrances to the building. They're at bus drop-offs and pickups. They're high traffic, foot traffic areas. So it's very important to take care of this. And again, we've got a second slide that just illustrates that, combinations of drainage and sidewalk cracking issues. The next slide is air conditioning. And again, this is something that the district has been an ongoing project that the school district has been tackling, and it's been putting window units in the instructional spaces. What this scope of work covers is all the instructional spaces that are not currently air conditioned. And the reason it's a really good idea to include this in the referendum is because we can do a really good permanent solution to these non-air conditioned spaces. Rather than putting window units in the windows, these are more centralized systems that are more energy efficient. They have better distribution. They can reduce the humidity, which reduces the chances of mold in the buildings. These centralized systems are not as noisy, which is good for the instructional spaces. And you also don't lose window space. So you get all the natural light that's currently coming through the windows. And on top of all that, you get the state aid if we're including it in a referendum. Security. So I mentioned that there was an assessment done, and one of the recommendations by law enforcement was to have security vestibules at all the schools. So that's what this referendum includes. It includes a secure vestibule at the main entrance of every building. Within that secure vestibule, there will be a transaction window so that visitors can get buzzed into that vestibule, but not allowed into the general corridors of the rest of the building without having first gone to that transaction window and produced identification and get approved to enter the rest of the building. So that's happening at every school. It includes electronic hardware for buzzing the visitors in. It includes cameras. It includes ballistic glazing for that vestibule, and also any other vulnerable areas around the first floor of the buildings. So the process and timeline, we submitted all these projects to the Department of Education. We have approval, and again, the Department of Education deemed all of these eligible for state aid. That state aid was accepted in terms of the amounts through preliminary eligible cost letters. So the board has really done all the paperwork necessary to have these projects eligible. And again, this state aid is only available if there's a successful referendum and the board bonds for this work. Otherwise, you're going to be paying full price for any of these projects. The date of the referendum is December 10th. We're hoping that it's a successful referendum. We'll start work the very next day with further field investigations, beginning with some geotechnical work out in the parking areas, some survey work. We'll be back up on the roofs getting more detailed information. We'd like to go out to bid with projects this spring and start work this summer, tackling mostly the pavement and the sidewalks and roof work and whatever else we can fit in for this summer, and then complete the balance of the projects the following summer. We'd like to do as much work as possible during the summer months so that we're not disturbing or interfering with class and the students. And we also think it's a good idea to separate it and spread it out over 2 summers, because we know you've got summer programs, and that way they can be, relocated around the work that's being completed again, so that those programs are not disturbed. The next slide, we've got a breakdown based on the categories I just went through, so you can kind of see where the money's going. The roofing is probably the largest category. Mechanical work and air conditioning are large categories as well. And site improvements, security vestibules. So it's just And there's further breakdown on the district website by category, by building, and there's a lot of useful information out there. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Guerrero, your bond counsel. She's going to talk about the financial aspects and the tax impact.
Thank you. Good evening. This is called a bond referendum because it authorizes the district to bond. Bond is just a fancy word for a loan. It allows the district to borrow the money to do the large capital projects. And the district, if the referendum passes, will borrow the money, bond the money, over a 20-year period. The bonds, the loan that the district will issue will be tax exempt, meaning that the people who buy the bonds don't pay taxes on the interest they earn. So the interest rate is lower than normal corporate bonds. So the district's financial advisor has estimated what the tax impact will be for the referendum. And before I go into the specifics, I want to tell you what the assumptions are. First, that the board will borrow the money over 20 years. Second, that the interest rate would be 3.5%. Now, that's a very conservative interest rate. The financial advisor tells us that if we sold the bonds today, they'd probably sell for under 3%. So what the district is trying to do is be a little conservative in its estimate. The estimate also assumes that the assessed values in town will never go up. It's just another conservative estimate to be sure that whatever information the district is putting out about this tax impact is conservative. In addition, the average assessed home, not the market value, the assessed home in Hillsborough is approximately $350,000. So let me go over that tax impact with you. Currently, the district has debt outstanding, and currently, taxpayers in Hillsborough pay that average assessed home pays about $139 a year to pay off those bonds. Those bonds are done being paid. They come off the books in 2022. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to structure the debt so that the new debt service, the new bond payments, kind of blend into the old bond payments so your taxes go up as little as possible. In fact, once we get past that 22-year, taxes actually to pay debt service go down. So let me just pull this in front of me because I'm having a hard time reading that. In 2021, based on your current debt service, the average assessed home pays $139. With the new bonds in the year 2021, that payment would go up to $179. It would go up $40. Then, from 2022 on, it would actually drop to $97 on the average assessed home. So with the old debt falling off and the new debt going on, from 2022 to 2041, there will actually be less taxes raised to pay off the debt than exists in 2020. So there is a bond payment. You are paying for it. It just happens to be less than what you're paying now for the old debt because it's falling off. That is the average impact on an average assessed home in Hillsborough. In Millstone, since the Millstone taxpayers did not previously pay for the prior obligation, they're going to pay approximately $85 on an average assessed home at $319,000. Again, this impact is structured to minimize any increase in taxes In 1 year, there's a $40 increase, but for the remaining 16 or 17 years, there's actually a decrease in your taxes dedicated to debt service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Goreb, and thank you, Mr. Wozni. I appreciate that. We appreciate all your efforts. I know that there was a lot of work. Yes, Mrs. Goreb?
I forgot something so important.
Sure,
I
please.
just have been working so long. I am sorry. Probably the most important thing about this tax impact
State aid.
is that the state contribution is really what kicks this down. I'm sorry, you should have kicked me in the head
It's
while I
okay.
was standing here. Okay. So, probably the most important thing about this tax impact is the state has determined that the entire project, every aspect of it, is eligible for the highest level of aid. What does that mean? That means that the state wrote you a letter saying, we think these projects are important, we think they're needed, and we're committed to paying 40% of these projects. What does that mean? It means they've committed to pay 40% of the principal and interest every year. It means they're committed to pay 40% of your bond payment every year. So if you have $1 million bond payment, the state says, okay, Hillsborough taxpayers, you raise $600,000 and we'll give you the remaining $400,000. And that's terrific. That's the great news. What the not so great news is that in the last 11 years, the state has funded that 40% aid at 34%, not at 40%, because every year the state has a budget. For the past 11 years, they funded that 40% at 34%. So that tax impact that I gave you this evening is based on the state paying 34%. Could they increase it to 40%? Yes. What would that impact be? Your taxes would go down even more. Could they reduce it to lower than 34%? Yes, but they have not done that in the last 11 years. In fact, this is a new law since 2000, so it's been in place for 19 years. So for 8 of those years, they funded it 40%. 11 years, they funded it at 34%. In my experience in doing this for 30 years, I have never seen the state drop the state share lower than the 34%. So I think it's also a conservative estimate for the district. Anything else I forgot?
Thank you. No.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Goreb. That was part of my notes. That was definitely a key point that we were going to mention anyway, but thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Wozni, for your presentation. The work that you folks have put into this is tremendous, and we appreciate that. We know that there's a lot of work that goes in. Looking at the PowerPoint presentation is wonderful, but the amount of time and effort that goes into developing this and getting into the details is quite extensive. So I don't get the opportunity to have the mic, and when I do, I could be long-winded. But I'm not going to only thank our professionals. I'm going to thank our superintendent, Dr. Antunes, because I know that, as President Haas said, she, in a very short period of time, was given this task, and it's been a pleasure to be by her side and to kind of work through this and to get into all these details. Those that don't know Dr. Antunes, she's a perfectionist, and she is just about getting it right, being transparent, and her big ticket was she wants to make sure that the public is aware of all the details, that there's no, it's all transparent. And I do appreciate that as the business administrator. It's just, it's a nice opportunity to work with somebody who's so detailed. And then our board, of course. Thank you. As I said, when I get the mic, I don't shut up a lot. Our board has now, for those that don't know this out there, our board doesn't get paid. This is an unpaid job. And the idea that they show up at meetings with us, that they came to Cafe Brio with us, a couple of board members, that shows a lot about how they care about our system and the contributions that they make to those, to what they do. And like I said, I appreciate that, and it makes me just proud to be a part of this team. So I want to thank everybody for that. And now I want to talk a little bit, thank you again, folks, but I want to talk a little bit about our frequently asked questions, because on our website, we have a host of FAQs. I picked on the ones that and I may be redundant, and I apologize if I'm doing that, but my goal was to kind of pick on ones that are related to finance, because that's kind of what I do.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about FAQ number 10, which says, when was the last time the district issued bonds for a referendum related to facility infrastructure? And the answer to that is the district has issued bonds for a referendum related to facility back in 2000. So we haven't done anything in terms of referendum like this until now. We're putting something out there. So just an FYI. Also, frequently asked question number 14, and I think Mrs. Gorab answered this question: how long will the bond be in effect? The bond will be in effect for 20 years. It's a 20-year bond, and as she had mentioned, the key to this for us is the interest rates. That low interest rate is going to help us tremendously. As far as the tax impact, I think Mrs. Gorab did a great job. I'm not going to go through that again. Unless somebody has questions when we open up the floor, we'd be happy to answer questions about the tax impact. What I do want to go over is what we call the overlap year. So that, again, in the form of transparency, that everybody understands what that means. So if the referendum passes on December 10th, the new debt will replace the current existing debt. We all know that. Hillsborough taxpayers will replace the $139 annually and will supplement an additional $40 only in 2021-22 with a new financial commitment after that of $97 annually beginning in 2022 and 2023 for an average home of assessed at $350,000. Therefore, in 2021, the average taxpayer will continue to pay the $139 annually. In 21-22, the average taxpayer will pay the $179 annually. And in 2022-23, estimated through the remainder of the life of the obligation, the average taxpayer will pay $97 annually. This is a replacement, not in addition to. So beginning in 2022 and 2023, this would be a reduction in our debt service aid of approximately $42 per household for the Hillsborough Township taxpayer. Frequently asked question number 15, and I think, Mrs. Gorab, this is the one that I wanted to talk about state funding, and we would receive an estimated anywhere between 34 to 40% from the state, and I like to use the word, and I think a couple of board members mentioned the word coupon. So it would be like a coupon that we receive from the state above our share. If the referendum does not pass, we do not get the coupon, we do not get the additional funding. And that's really, in terms of summarizing it, the referendum will repair, replace, and revive our schools while not increasing taxes, except for that overlap year. The referendum takes advantage of low interest rates, and most importantly, the 40% coupon that we get from the state. So that kind of summarizes the finances, and hopefully if board members have questions, or the public, we'd be happy to answer any of those questions. But I think our board is extremely educated on the referendum and the finance aspect of it as well. So, thank you.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Just remind people to come.
Do you have something else?
Just want to remind people that we do have community meetings and facilities tours planned. Most of the facilities tours are aligned with the HSA meetings, and we're always adding things, although I think we're out almost every night for the next 2 weeks through up until Thanksgiving, and then the week after Thanksgiving as well. But we'll fit you in if you want to talk, so that's not a problem. And then please go on and take a look at our website with any additional questions as well.
Yes.
So I had a couple of questions for clarification, not necessarily for me, but because I have been asked these questions. So I think if we are putting this up on the website and we have our professionals here, it might be good to get it on tape. The first is for Ms. Gorab. I have been attending many of these meetings, and a lot of the questions that we get are with respect to the out years. So you said the assumption was that the house would be at $350,000. That also is an assumption, correct, that the assessments in town would remain the same. So if we have more ratables and things like that, or less, this number could shrink considerably, depending on if your house assessment stays the same or not, or it goes up, correct? If we have fewer taxable ratables.
Yes, to the extent there's new construction in town. Sometimes ratables go up and down together, but to the extent there's new ratables in town, yes, the tax impact would decrease because there's a bigger pie to carry the cost.
As long as those were not piloted or tax abated by the town.
That's
correct?
right. That's
Okay.
correct.
And then the second thing is that this is sort of a separate pot of money within our budget for debt service, and it is not subject to the 2% cap increase. So in other words, if everything stayed the same, ratables stayed the same, your assessments stayed the same and everything, over the and we pass no further debt referenda in the future, that number of $97 per year would stay the same for 20 years after, or the 19 years remaining
Yeah.
after.
Yes, once the bonds are sold, interest rate is locked in, and under your assumption, nothing else changes, it stays the same, assessments, because the bond interest rate will be fixed. And you're right, the debt service is a completely different side than your general fund budget. The debt service side is not subject to the 2% cap. It doesn't mix with the general fund budget. They're divided by a very thick wall there.
Great,
Yes.
thank you. So, and then the other questions, if I may continue, are for Mr. Wozni. So you were actually at the coffee with the superintendent where some citizens in town had come and said, what about this project, what about that project, and things like that. So if you could speak a little bit to what would happen if, can we change these? I know the answer, but I want you to answer it. Can we now change any of these projects, or do we have to go with what had been submitted to the state? And then what happens if the projects come in under what you have budgeted, and we want to do other things, or can we do other things if that is the case?
Okay, so when we describe these projects, both in the information that goes down to the state and what is on your ballot, we tried to keep them as loose as possible or less specific so that we can, when we drill down into the detailed design, we can make adjustments as needed. So if there's a piece of equipment over here that maybe rises to a higher priority than something else that we have in the plans, we can make those kinds of adjustments. We just have to stick within the language of the ballot and the information that went down to the state. And as long as we're doing work within the categories described, we can do some shifting of some of the funds and some of the scope of work. And we've got a lot of systems built into the process. So all our cost estimates have not just construction costs, but we have a 25% on top of that for soft costs. 10% of that, or 2/5 of that 25%, is just a pure contingency number for any unforeseen conditions. Things that we may not be planning. Let's say we do some geotechnical testing out in a parking lot. We realize we have to dig up more than what we need to, or there's a drainage problem that we couldn't really see from the surface. Things like that. So we have contingencies built in. When we craft the bid documents, we have alternates built into those documents as well, so that if the bids come in low, we can maybe accomplish more than what we had planned, again, staying within the language of the referendum ballot and the scope of work that went down to the state. So we have that kind of flexibility if, again, depending on how the bids come in with those what we call alternates. They're add alternates or deduct alternates, so we can kind of craft the award of the contracts to the budget that's available.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Greg?
Yeah, well, while Mike is up there, I had a question. This is a criticism that we sometimes hear from the public that goes something like this. Maybe you could speak to it. If we'd only maintained our facilities better over the past 20 years, we wouldn't have to do this now. So what's the validity of that, or is there any, in a statement like that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we work with a lot of school districts around the state, and I've never worked with one that was able to keep up the pace of deterioration over the years just through an annual budget. Usually that's a limited amount of funds available to do all the usual things that you do to maintain the buildings, changing filters, making repairs on aging equipment. But when you get to the point where you've got to make large wholesale replacements of equipment, the unit ventilators are a good example. There's a lot of unit ventilators in the classrooms. They've been maintained over the years, annually, or even more frequently. And when they go down, the parts have to be replaced. Those parts are no longer available. And again, some of those pieces no longer meet current codes. So if you've got to change out an entire system like that, that's not something that your district usually can do out of an annual budget.
I agree with that. I like to tell people to think of their own homes, and it doesn't matter how many times you could be that homeowner that flushes that water heater every year. I don't know that there's anybody that does that, but you could be that homeowner, and you're still going to need to replace that hot water heater. You're still going to need to do the furnace eventually, roof, major appliances. It doesn't matter how well you maintain them. Sometimes things are just finished. I think that's what we have here. It might be interesting for the public to know that you talked about, or when was the last time we had a construction like this? We passed a referendum on October 3rd, 2000. It was for $21 million. By the way, it passed by a 2-to-1 margin, which is pretty good. I'm not trying to jinx anything. I hope I'm not jinxing it. But it passed by a 2-to-1 margin, $21 million. It was for, if I recall correctly, for expanding this school to almost double the size of the Orton Road School, to add expansion to the high school to bring it from a nominal capacity of 2,000 to 2,600 students, which is a current nominal capacity, and to do science labs at the middle school, and also to replace some HVAC systems at the middle school. It was for $21 million, and that was it. So the debt we're carrying now that Mr. Mahmood talked about that's going to come off is that debt, plus some of the debt from the original construction of Orton Road School, which is just a few years before that. So those two amounts, and that's been refinanced over the years and played with, but basically that's the current debt we're carrying for construction. And it has been a long time since we did a project like this, but I think it's definitely needed.
Thank you, Greg.
That's it.
I would just like to add to Greg's original point about the ability to keep up with maintenance, the original construction date on all of our schools. Hillsborough Elementary School is 70 years old. Sunnymead Elementary School is 60 years old. Triangle Elementary School is 59 years old. Woodfern Elementary School is 59 years old. Woods Road Elementary School is 52 years old. Hillsborough High School is 50 years old this year. Hillsborough Middle School is 44 years old. Amsterdam is 29 years old. And Orton Road Intermediate School is 21 years old, the baby of the group. But, other than Amsterdam and Orton Road School, it's clear that major things need to be done to school buildings that exceed 40 years old. And some have been done, and some have been done piecemeal, and some have been done on an emergency basis, which is always more expensive. So this referendum saves money to some degree in terms of its ability to avoid problems that have to be dealt with on an emergency basis, which is always more expensive than a planned, process whereby things get replaced and bid and competitively bid and hopefully for a good price. I'd also like to add to all of the things that have been said tonight, something about voting, because before our next board meeting is the deadline for registering to vote for this December 10th referendum. In order to vote, and I see a lot of young people in our audience, I hope you're paying attention. If your birthday falls between now and December 10th, you can register to vote up to November 19th in order to vote in this particular referendum. So please do. The rule is usually 21 days before an election. You've got to be 18 years old. You've got to live at your address for 30 days prior to the election. You have to be a U.S. citizen, and you must not be serving a sentence on parole or probation, et cetera, and you must not be adjudged mentally incompetent. So anyway, you can register to vote at the Somerset County Clerk's Office on 20 Grove Street, Somerville, between 8:30 and 4:30 p.m. Some people will be voting at different locations for this election than where they voted in November. So please look at your sample ballot, which will tell you exactly where you have to go to vote. However, also in our FAQs, or frequently asked questions, we have listed every polling place and which ones will be voting at the same location and which one will be voting at a new location. But please use your sample ballot, which will arrive within a week of the election at your home. And please rely on that for that information. And the deadlines for mail-in ballots are also described in our FAQs. If people want to request mail-in ballots, I think we have some forms over here on your way out. Just remember to vote on December 10th.
I have one question.
Yes.
You made a good point about how we will have cost savings since we won't be relying on these emergency solutions. But I was also wondering if there will be cost savings as far as like our heating and cooling being more cost efficient?
Yeah. Yes. Ma'am?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Stats, absolutely.
Prepared to answer.
Thank you. Thank you. That is an absolute true statement. As if this referendum passes, the expectation is, and I know Mr. DeLuca is here, that the buildings and grounds budget, he's not going to like this, is going to be reduced. And it's going to be reduced for the fact that we are becoming more efficient, and all these things are going to kind of change that budget around where it's absolutely going to pay back the board. That level of budgeting is going to go down, and we can concentrate on other areas of the budget.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask
Yes,
one more
Joyce.
question? Mr. Wagney had mentioned that he noticed a drain that was around the school, and there were cracks going towards the drain. Excuse me, and that may indicate an additional issue. What if, and there's contingency money there in case that happens, what happens to that money if the problems are not really there and they don't have to use that money? So what happens then?
I think the question you're asking is, at the end of the day, the project's all done, there's bond money left over, right? You're kind of saying everything's done, punch list, everything's perfect, and you have extra money, right, excess money. In that scenario, the law is very clear that excess money goes back to the taxpayers as tax relief to help pay off the bonds. But I want to make that clear. That is after every punch list item is done. So let me give you an example. Every punch list item is done. Superintendent looks out at a parking lot which has had construction trucks go on and over it and beat it up, and she calls me up, or Iman calls me up and says, God, our parking lot got totally decimated as a result of this construction. The trucks destroyed it. Are we allowed to use bond funds to fix that? The answer to that is yes, because that is a permitted expense, even though parking lot, pothole fixing or whatever may or may not have been in the question for that school. That's a project that stems from the construction project. So what we're going to be sure of is that every project is completely done, and then to the extent there's excess money at that point, then yes, it goes back to the taxpayers for tax relief.
I have a question on that, Lisa. So, in other words, if everything has to be put back as good as when it started or not? Like, I mean, if they destroyed grass field because of constant, can you resod because of trucks and
if trucks are
problems?
going over a field.
Or they set up a
yes.
construction equipment there long-term or something?
Yes, and that's part of
Okay.
what the contingency is for. The scope of the project is goal-related. It's goal-related, air conditioning, placing air conditioning. What if you need an electrical upgrade to do it? Yes, that's included. What if you destroy tiles in installing the air conditioning? Can you replace those tiles? Yes, even though tile replacement may not be a specific line item. So this is a project that has to stay faithful to the bond question, but has contingency in it to cover some unanticipated costs. Yes.
Thank you.
So I have a question. So I recognize that was just a hypothetical, but that's a problem in a way. So is there an order of operations as to which project will be done first? Because if, as I heard, the parking lot will be done first, but then the trucks that are coming into the parking lot may then damage the pavement that we're paving in the schools, that's a problem, because then we're kind of wasting money. So I recognize that was just an example, but I leave it to the professionals, but I'm just raising that as a concern because that was a surprise.
That's why we have
Let me address
professionals.
that. That was a hypothetical example. Is that better?
Yeah.
So we are planning on doing the parking lots first, and one of the reasons is they're in bad shape. If we wait longer, it's going to cost more. It's also something that we can design in enough time. It's not a long lead item. We're not doing any major construction, new buildings, so we don't have any real heavy equipment coming in. We're not talking about cranes. We're not talking about, pickup trucks with a lot of, material, that sort of thing. And built-in tariff plans and specifications are all the things that the contractor is responsible for in terms of maintaining the site, protecting everything that he's touching, and they're responsible for putting things back to the condition they were in when they started the project, and anything else that's related on their way getting to that part of the project on school property. Anything that is related is built into those plans and specs in very, very much detail. So I wouldn't be concerned about but it's a good point that we do think about the sequence of operation and what makes sense to do when. And usually that's more related to when you're doing a whole building or a larger new construction project, the order that you do things in. We've got a list of things that we can logically plan out, and the scheduling has more to do with how involved and how much time it takes to design the portions. Some of the mechanical portions, we just can't finish the design in time to do that work this coming summer. So that's why that's being delayed a little bit.
I have a question. So if in doing the work they cause some damage of their own, is it the money that's in the contingency that will cover that, or will they have to pay for it?
They're responsible for protecting everything that they're working with, and that cost is borne by them. The district doesn't have to pay for damage, caused by a contractor through the course of a construction project. That's done by the contractor.
Thank you.
Well, that's good.
Are there any more questions?
Moving right along.
Yeah, moving right along, okay. The next item, thank you very much to our professionals, Lisa Gora, Mike Wozniak, and your associates from EI Associates. Thank you very much for doing this presentation, and we'll continue on with our agenda, but I'd like, people who are in the audience, when they have the chance to take time and look at the projects along the wall here, and we also have handouts on the frequently asked questions and vote by mail applications and brochures by school on the table over here. So you can pick those up on your way out if you wish. Anyway, committee reports. We had a communications committee meeting today with Dr. Harris in charge.
Yes, we had our Communications Committee meeting today, and our main focus is making everything clear so that our referendum has no lack of transparency. And I would like to thank Dr. Antunes and the administration for the excellent job they've done in trying to get the website with frequently answered questions, with Dr. Antunes showing up almost every night of the week. Do you ever go home?
No.
Showing up for presentations to the public. And I don't know how else we could educate the community any better than we're trying to do. So please, people, get out there and educate yourself on what we need to do for this referendum. This is not a frills referendum. It's something that needs to be done. So, in our attempts to do that, we are looking at perhaps putting some flyers in local stores who will help support our efforts. And I think that all of us on the board have in our minds the safety and the health of our students and our teachers in the building. And so to that effort, we're all putting in extra hours of overtime trying to get to the public. And so we're hoping that we reach senior citizens, we're hoping that we reach parents who do not have children in the community, and we're looking at all aspects of where we need to reach out to. So that basically is what our Communications Committee meeting was. And I'd also just like to say thank you for all the schools did something for Veterans Day today, and that was greatly appreciated, I'm sure, by the community and all of the veterans as well as their families. So I commend the schools for doing the extra 100-mile run. Thank you.
You know, to your point, some of our schools had ceremonies, but other schools have displays where they've asked people to, from their school community to send in photos and material about their relatives who are veterans, which is all very nice and good. Okay, so are there any other reports, comments, or whatever? You have a Muni Alliance?
This is related to the Municipal Alliance. Yet another thing on this Thursday will be Night of Conversation, which will focus on vaping, and it will start at 7 o'clock at the municipal building. So we really encourage people to go because it will be very informative, because it is a serious issue that our district has been on top of.
Yes, thank you for reminding us of that. Yes, Jean?
Oh, since, may I also make an announcement that the Drama Club, Drama Theater, will have It's a Wonderful Life this Friday and Saturday at the high school. I believe it starts at 8 o'clock, but they do have a Facebook page with all the information on it. 7, I think, okay, 7 or 8, something like that.
Okay, yay, Drama Club. Do you have a comment, Chris?
I was going to report on the Human Resources Committee meeting that we had last week.
Have at it.
Just since we were talking about committee meetings, I figured what the heck. We did have a brief committee meeting last Thursday. The first item for us that we addressed was the recommendation for the interim science supervisor, who we approved earlier this evening. We also discussed potential changes to the substitute custodian rate of pay, and we discussed changes to the job description for the maintenance mechanic, and that was what we took care of that morning. But the big focus was to make sure we could review the interim science supervisor so we could get it onto tonight's agenda to keep that moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other reports that anybody has? I know the other committees are all meeting this coming week.
Just want to
Yes.
mention, I've been in contact with the dance team coach, so as a supporter, I want to say that they have a showcase of their routines, that they are taking to nationals, and that will be December 7th at 4 p.m.
Okay. Looking forward to that. Okay. With everybody's permission, we'll move on. Okay. The next item on our agenda after committee reports is public hearing on the superintendent's contract. Now, Lisa has been acting as superintendent since October 1st. We're very happy. By law, you have to have a public hearing on a superintendent's contract. So this is what that is. Her contract is really an addendum to her existing employment contract as assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, which she has been for 15 years for our district. So with that, are there any comments about the superintendent's contract?
Sorry.
Go for it, Greg.
So in the contract, like maybe our esteemed attorney, we got the good one tonight.
Don't tell Steve.
Don't tell Steve. On numbered paragraph 4, can you give some clarification on numbered paragraph 4? Do you have it?
I don't have it in front of me.
All right.
but
Just,
someone can give it
am
to
I
me.
allowed to read part of it? It's nothing, that doesn't reflect on performance or anything.
Right.
It just says, in addition to her current duties as Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Antunes agrees to faithfully perform all the duties of Acting Superintendent as directed by the Board. Okay. But we've hired somebody for Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. So I don't know that these new duties are in addition to her current duties. So
Right.
Can you speak to
Sure.
that?
So that's kind of standard language that we put in whenever someone is being in an acting position. Because technically speaking, her role while as the acting superintendent of schools right now, she still is the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. That position has not been vacated. She's temporarily doing the position of the superintendent. So that's why the language reads the way it does.
So even if you have a new person filling that role, she's still responsible for it. We can still get her on that.
Right.
She would be
Yes.
responsible
I'm just
under
gonna-
any
if
circumstance.
there's a problem, I'm just going to say paragraph 4. Paragraph 4. I got it.
Could I just to make sure I understand, and maybe for the public too, is that really based on the distinction of acting versus interim? That acting implies that she has not left that previous
No,
job,
it's the same thing.
versus interim is somebody
Right.
who is specifically replacing, as opposed to that acting?
Yeah, the Department of Education has made that acting versus interim a little bit confusing, to be honest. And they have changed their opinion on what that means several times over the past 10, 15 years. But, right, the bottom line is that, technically speaking, at some point in time, you will choose a permanent superintendent. And depending upon who that is, Dr. Antunes may either return to her role, or she may be the permanent superintendent, whatever it is, and then she's no longer acting, right? And so, yes, at that point in time. So right now, there's, technically speaking, think of it almost as like a leave of absence, right? Everyone is like on a leave, she's on a leave of absence for her assistant superintendent to the curriculum instruction piece, and she's filling the role of superintendent, so forth and so on. That happens to everybody who's in these acting roles.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
All good?
Yeah.
With
We have to
that,
vote
any
on it?
public comment on the superintendent's contract? Okay, seeing none, we move on. We'll be voting on that under HR. Okay, we're finally at comments from the board and public. I think the board has made a lot of comments already, so let's go to the public. This is for public input on the 2021 budget, as well as on the action agenda. So please confine your comments to that. We welcome your input. We'll have another public comment after we complete the agenda, and you can address any topic then. Before you make your comment, please state your name and address. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker. Please understand our public forums are not structured as question and answer sessions, but rather are offered as opportunities to share your thoughts with the board. In instances where the board believes there is a misunderstanding or inaccuracy, the board president or superintendent will address the comment. There may be times when a member of the public makes a comment or asks a question about personnel or hiring decisions. New Jersey statutes do not permit the board to discuss personnel issues in public session. And yes. Right. Okay, as I'm reminded by our esteemed business administrator, as long as everybody's esteemed tonight. Any questions that you may have in regard to the referendum? We still have our professionals here, so this would be the time to come up with those questions. So, with that.
Didier Jimenez, Gemini Drive. So tonight I come here, I don't want to sound like a nagging person, but I'd like to talk to the board, the members of the board, and my community and those watching. Perhaps open their mind and their perspective on situations. So obviously I'm very concerned about the whole contract negotiations and so forth. But as a union member, I've been in situations where I will be working without a contract, so I know how it feels. And perhaps my experience would persuade you to deal with this with more urgency. I had the opportunity to expand my nonprofit career in 2017, 2018. For 2 years, I worked full-time at a homeless shelter. At this homeless shelter, you spend 8 hours in there, and you are responsible for everything. Police officers come, you are the face that you need to speak to them. Firefighters, fights. This is a family homeless shelter. We have 120 people. Average, half of them are children, and the other half, their parents are single women that would stay there. Obviously, this is temporary housing, so everybody's stressed out because they have to figure out how they're going to find affordable housing, which is really hard lately. And the situation for a lot of folks, economy-wise, is not doing very well. My point is, I saw a lot of things, dealt with a lot of situations, from miscarriages, deaths, people being brought up with Narcan, the drug. And I saw a lot of stuff. And within not even 6 months, our staff got a huge raise. Why? Because the board of directors for that nonprofit understood, just like the board over here did not get paid to volunteer to be the board of directors. But they were smart enough to understand that the stuff that I was dealing with daily, I needed my full focus on. Because if I have to worry about making my payments, my car payments, or my rent payments, or anything else that I need to be able to live and travel, I would not be able to fully focus myself in these situations where I have to deal with their parents and the children, and most of them not happy about being there. So every day I went there with a big smile trying to change their life. And you know what? That raise helped me out a lot, and it helped them out even more. That place became a positive place where folks were not ashamed to be there. You should not look down on somebody unless you're helping them up, and that's what I practice. So I hope you understand how much this means. When people are paid a wage that they don't have to worry and be constantly unsure about their financial future. I did, and guess what? After that raise, I stopped. I stopped worrying. I was able to deal with this job, which top 5 more stressful jobs career-wise are police officers and teachers. You know what? Which one I didn't find there? The career that I was doing for 2 years for experience. So I want you to understand that the teachers, police officers, firemen, they're all the most stressful careers, not mine, and I was listened to. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for your work with the homeless.
Hello. Brendan O'Kane, Harvest Drive. I just had a quick question, or comment more on the referendum. I know you mentioned at Alton Road there's lacrosse balls that are hitting the wall there. Is there anything that you guys plan to do to prevent players and all those from putting more lacrosse balls at the wall, because honestly, I don't see a point in fixing the wall and then having more kids ramming balls at it or something. So I encourage you guys to look at a solution maybe to prevent that from happening again.
Good idea. I like it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where is this location? Okay, thank you very much.
Carl Srirachi, 3 Simonson Lane. I don't have a lacrosse question, but that's a good point he made. But I do have, I don't know if it's a question or a comment more about the referendum with regards to, I know we're talking about the tax cap and the budget cap, but would the school district need to go to referendum? Couldn't they do this underneath their current budget, issue bonds? Yeah.
The only way that a school district can borrow on a long-term basis is to go to referendum by law.
So, because I saw in your presentation that there's going to be an increase on that line item. Currently, right now, I know the school board or the budget currently has maxed out, its cap on both budget and tax at this point. So isn't this referendum actually giving them the opportunity to go exceed that or actually raise the base from which they can, start doing tax, issuing or, what was I trying to say, the tax increases from that point?
You are accurate. On the general fund side, there is a 2% cap. On the debt service side, which is a separate side of the budget, there are 2 sections, the general fund side and the debt service side. This is the debt service side. So once the referendum is approved, that tax is set and is not subject to the 2% cap that's on the general fund side.
Right, so it's essentially a way to circumvent that part because they can't fund the debt service through the operating budget by putting it into capital.
No, they're not permitted by law to do that. It's not a circumvent, that they're not permitted by law to do that.
I think to clarify, so I think what you were saying is, once that's set,
right.
It can't go up, that amount, unless you do another referendum.
Right.
Otherwise, it's flat, so, right. It's not subject to the cap, but it's also not going to increase every year. You can't increase it. We can't increase that 2% or 3% or 4%. It's a flat amount that's going to be in effect for the 20 years.
Right, so it's a straight up tax.
Correct.
To fund that part of it. So then in the 2 years where you kind of showed that it would lower there, where do those funds go to? How does that impact your budget cap?
It doesn't affect the general fund. People get taxed less.
We're paying off a loan that has extended the last 20 years, and we're starting a new loan. So it does nothing to the cap.
Hold on.
Can I be recognized?
One at a time. Yes, Greg.
All right. So I kind of see where Carl might be thinking on this. It is 2 separate things, just as Ms. Gorb said. The general fund has a tax levy cap of 2%. If we have referendums, issue bonds, that's completely separate. But the 2 things come together to create the tax rate.
Yes.
That's true. The tax rate is unified between the 2 things. So in the last few years, you've seen that as the debt has slowly come off in small amounts, that has helped our tax rate go down. Since our debt service has been going very slowly down, that'll take 2 big leaps down over the next couple of years. It's been good. So as that's helped our tax rate come down a little bit. So they are unified only on tax rate, but there's no cap or any cap or anything on tax rate. Tax rate just is what it is. Right. After you have the tax levy cap, the rate's calculated, and you know this from being government, that's with the ratables in the town and everything else.
Right. Well, and I guess maybe things are different between school budgets and municipal budgets, because municipal budgets, we're able to fully fund all of our debt.
Right.
And if things are managed properly, you should be able to do that too through the capital fund on some of these projects, because these are capital projects, and I know you have a capital line item that you would, would fund through your operating budget. So some of these things could be a cash as you go on some of these items. So I would think, just to take that into consideration. And also just on one, last item, I know how we're touting how the state's picking up 40%, but we all know that is a tax increase one way or the other on the taxpayers in New Jersey. Because right now, look, let's face it, the state can't afford to be doing those type of items. They should be putting that money back into their own infrastructure, into roads, shoring up the teachers' fund, pension fund. But we know we're going to wind up paying it one way or the other. So the 40% isn't free money, to the average taxpayer. There is going to be, it's not free money. It's going to come from somewhere.
Well, or else it would go to other towns. I mean, honestly, any aid that we can get from the state, if it didn't come here, it would go elsewhere, and it's still coming out of our taxpayers' pockets. Correct?
Well, just because someone else is doing something wrong doesn't mean that we should be doing the same thing. We should be setting examples. I'm fundamentally opposed to all the school districts that do, such funding like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Yes.
James Simpson, 8 Apple Hill Road, Hillsborough, New Jersey. If I were to borrow that $35.4 million at 3.5% interest amortized over the 20 years, I'm paying $14.9 million in interest.
Correct.
Check that. Okay. So the state of New Jersey is going to pay that interest, not the principal. It's just going to be the interest, because the state of New Jersey only does debt servicing. So you said that, we couldn't do any of these capital improvements unless we go to bond or referendum, because they're not going to pay, we're not going to get any state aid for that. So they're not paying any principal on any of the capital improvements. They're only paying the interest. Are they paying the interest yearly? I think that's how they're paying it. Hope you're paying the interest monthly, try to decrease that. And you say there's no real guarantees on how much, whether they're going to contribute 40% or 35% over the 20 years that this loan has been borrowed for. So it could fluctuate every year depending upon the state budget. So the schools definitely need some repairs, and I'm not denying that. So I'm trying to solve crack this nut another way. Instead of borrowing the money, to which we think, well, that's free money, but of course it is our state tax dollar money, not really free money. We're kind of used to paying our current taxes as they are right now without having this decrease from this current tax burden. Our referendum could have said, instead of us borrowing money, we could have had a referendum that said keep our budget for maintenance at the same rate that we're paying for the 20 years ago, or 22, it'll be 22 years ago for the $22 million to Auten Road. If you look at the money for there with the number of taxpayers, that's raising $50 million over 20 years. You could spend $200,000 a year on 9 schools for its maintenance, to work on its parking lots, its roofs, its ventilation system, and then you wouldn't be in debt, and you wouldn't have to worry about whether the state's going to fund you the way you're thinking it. You wouldn't have to worry about that at all. And then if you had this assessment in 2018, you knew about it. So last March we had a referendum to which we as the public didn't know anything about the age in the schools. But you knew about it a long time ago, not mentioned in the March referendum. So there's something else that is going to be coming down the road. You might need some more funding for your salaries, teachers, and programming. You might need some money for athletic fields. There was nothing on those mentions. Did I see anything about for improvement of any athletic fields or athletic equipment? So you might come to the citizens of Hillsborough and say, we need some money for athletic department. Might come back to the citizens and say, we need a new high school. So if you weren't committed into a $35.4 million loan right now for this referendum, and you are maintaining your schools with the same amount of money that we're paying right now, then you could come to the public again to look for a loan. So the urgency to rush this through on December the 10th at another $25,000 for a rushed referendum vote, that if it passes, good, you get to roll that into the money that you borrowed. If it doesn't pass, then you got to be looking someplace in your budget for another $25,000. On top of what you spent last March, you have the $25,000, and every time you come for a special election. I just see that there would be a more fiscally responsible way to tackle this problem than to borrowing this money the way you have presented it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Young lady. Okay.
Hi, my name is Alicia Liu, Galligan Drive. So Mr. Fenster is my debate teacher, and he says I speak too quickly and I make too many points. So if that ever happens, please blink really quickly so I know to slow down. So I have an interesting argument as I know a lot of people have been complaining about the possible $40 increase in their taxes according to the 350 grand model. However, here's a slight interesting thing. I have here a Duke study. It says this, I need to find it. Recent literature reconfirms the positive correlation of school performances on house prices, basically using that through test scores. So what I'm basically saying is that, so we know that Hillsborough has great schools. The problem that we're lacking the most in right now is probably facilities. And facilities do have an impact on learning. So if, hypothetically, if our facilities improved and our scores improved, your house value would also improve. If you're going to move away, you don't want to pay your taxes, well, fine, sell your house for a better price. Princeton real estate is insane. It's because it's close to Princeton University, but it's also because Princeton, the town, has the second best district in the township. People will pay a premium for that. So the reality is that it may seem, I think it's myopic to see this tax and sort of oh, it's $40 out of my pocket. That's 3 months of Netflix. That's 3 months of Netflix and 800 chicken nuggets. You can live without fast food for 2 months. It's not that hard. I've done it.
Forever.
The reality is that I think people are looking at this very myopically. The reality is if your education goes up, your house price will too in the end. And maybe not all of you will live in Hillsborough. You can move, just sell. You're going to make in the end more money. That's what people care about, I've learned in a very hard way. People really care about money. I didn't realize that. But my last suggestion would be for so I noticed they had said that it says averages. The average house price is $350 grand. However, I see some problems with that number only because if I'm taking this literally, average means to be mean. However, in Hillsborough, we've had some recent developments in Toll Brothers and Country Classics, which means that there have been several developments of houses in which that is far greater than the original mean. So what that does is that it pulls the mean a lot farther. So in reality, maybe the median could have been a better thing. I don't know what that would have been, but I know the data is most likely skewed to the left, which means that it's being pulled in a certain way. And lastly, I thought this would be kind of cool. I didn't think it would be that complicated either. Colleges have financial aid calculators. I've been looking at them recently because I'm a senior. But I was thinking, we only have that number, as far as I know, that number for the 350 grand house. So why don't we hypothetically create a calculator like that? Oh, we do? Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. I'm sorry.
We actually do.
Oh, okay, that would be really, okay. I'm sorry about that.
On the website.
Okay, I'm sorry. But I hope, like,
Great idea,
I think
Alicia.
it would be an interesting thing to send that out in an email. Sorry, I'm done. Sorry if I was too fast, but that was all I had to say.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I could just clarify that last point, if you do go to the Repair, Replace, Revive on our district website, on the left side, there is a referendum FAQ, and then the next link below that is to the tax calculator, which will do exactly what you're asking for. So it's right out there on the website.
Yes, it is, along with a whole bunch of other good information. So, next speaker?
Hi, Ed Yarshinsky, 3380 East Mountain Road. Does the board have a contingency plan if this referendum does not pass? Has the board considered how they'll address these issues with the schools if the referendum does not pass? Can you tell the public what you might consider if the referendum doesn't pass?
Okay.
Sure. I think it's a very good question. The board has been discussing, and I don't know if you know this, but the board has been depositing money in cap reserve. So the board, while it's not enough to cover, even a small portion of this referendum, the board has to consider prioritizing. Unfortunately, they're all prioritizing in terms of the roof repairs and some of the real essential things. So it's a phase-in. The board is discussing it. We have been discussing it. Can we say to you at this moment, this is the exact contingency plan? No, unfortunately, but we have been discussing it with the operations committee. Our professionals are aware of it. It's going to be one of those things where we're going to have to prioritize and kind of work, as Mr. Sirachi said, individually, a little bit at a time. Unfortunately, we don't believe that we're beyond that stage. That's why the referendum is here. But it's a good question, and the answer to your question is yes, there has been discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also just like to say, it bears repeating because everybody doesn't know all of this. Our budget, 80% of our budget is for salaries and benefits. The remaining 20%, and by the way, both of which are higher generally than the 2% cap. I mean, our health benefits have gone up, 15 to 20% a year, and we're still under a 2% cap. Very difficult to deal with that. We also, out of the other 20%, we have to deal with transportation costs, which are about $8 million. We can't control the bids that come in for those. We use private contractors for busing, and the market is such that nobody can get bus drivers. And it's a very expensive business to be in, and people are going out of the business. So we're sort of at the mercy of those companies in terms of that area. We have special ed tuition, and God bless, we want everybody to have an appropriate education. However, outside organizations are not limited in terms of how much they could raise their tuition on school buses that send children to other places to cover their special needs. So we have a lot of things going on in the school district that we really don't have very much control over how much money we could save in our budget. And by the way, we have a buildings and grounds budget for regular routine maintenance. That's also part of that 20% that's left over. And at the last board meeting, we actually approved our comprehensive maintenance plan for the year, which we do every year. And that's several $100,000. Again, we have 9 school buildings, and it's tough. And as I said before, they're pretty old, many of them. And this was a way to go out for this comprehensive referendum rather than going out several times for a referendum, to put all these things into one package and hopefully get the community support. But if the community doesn't support it, ultimately, it's not going to happen in an efficient manner. And honestly, we've had a lot of events over the last couple of years where things would break down. 3 winters ago, we had no heat in some of our schools. We had to make an emergency purchase in terms of getting that repaired. We had other buildings and grounds issues. And the worst way you could pay for it is an emergency. So it's just tough. I mean, something has to give, but I appreciate your comments. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Alex Asensio. I come from North Fuller Road. And my question for the board is pretty simple. If the referendum that the board is proposing were to pass, would there be a possibility of a referendum in the future? Because I know the referendum would be seeking authority for a 20-year bond, which is a long time. So how could it be that we know for sure that this 20-year bond wouldn't collide with a possible referendum in the future where we would possibly, where the board would possibly ask more from us? This goes in line with because, I mean, the previous referendum that the board tried to pass, didn't pass, and it would be favorable to seek the goodwill of us, the voters. So I'm just also wondering how would the board seek to establish goodwill for the voters to ensure a more decent voter turnout?
That's a tough one. I mean, honestly, there are limits to what we can do in terms of how much we can push people to vote for a particular referendum. We're allowed to provide information to the public, which I think we're doing very well right now. I think we've put out every piece of information on this referendum that we can, but we can't tell people to vote yes or no. We did happily have a unanimous vote of the board, so at least I can tell the public that the board unanimously felt that this should be a priority for the public. But the bottom line is the referendum process gives the public an opportunity to go thumbs up or thumbs down. So you are in control over, what happens. And honestly, everybody has an obligation to vote. That is the price of citizenship. And if you're not in it, you don't win it. But seriously, I mean, we had a 25% turnout at our last referendum, which was almost as good as our referendum this past, election day last week. I think we had about 29% turnout in Hillsborough this past November election. So, yeah, we would love to get it up to 100%, but even the presidential elections don't go that high anymore. But yeah, I mean, I hope everybody spreads the word and reminds people to vote on December 10th. And we also have opportunities with mail-in ballots now. And there's really no excuse. People who know that they're out of town can vote in advance. You could go up to the clerk's office, fill out the ballot right there. So.
You're out of time.
Yeah, good. Okay, I'm quiet. Anybody else want to add to that? Or yes, Greg?
So I'll add one more comment to this referendum discussion before we go to the action agenda.
Yes.
And also here's some more public. Yeah, I know. So I think it's almost been a whole generation, 19 years, since we had a vote on a major construction project. In the 50 years before that, they had maybe like 3, 4, 5 years. When the town was getting built out, when enrollment was increasing every year by hundreds of students, we're building new schools, we're adding on to schools, and I think did the public forget in a generation that this is how you pay for major construction and maintenance projects? You bond for them. It's been a full 19 years. So I mean, this is a typical, usual, best practice way to pay for these projects. Maybe we should have in the past 19. Maybe we should have thrown in a few here and there, just so people wouldn't forget how it was done. But this is the best practice way to do it. So.
Yeah, and honestly, on the tax levy type of referendum that we had last March, I'm noticing in the ones that were approved or rejected in other towns, I mean, some of the towns throughout New Jersey go out for like $225,000, okay? Like to hire like a student assistance counselor, and a world language teacher, and a phys ed teacher. And, another one went out, for mental health services for children for $475,000, $121,000 to cover an unanticipated increase in student enrollment. There are some districts throughout the state that go out to referendum on a regular basis for a small amount of money that they might need to balance their budget. But unfortunately, this year we had a state aid cut, and we had some issues with our surplus because of expenditures that we had to make 3 years ago to replace some of the things that exploded on us. And, we asked the public said no. And unfortunately, there were some horrible circumstances, what's the word I'm looking for?
Unexpected.
Some horrible consequences that, affected students and teachers and us, because we want to have the best district we possibly can. And we hate to see those kinds of cuts or fees, things that we've never done before. So voting has consequences. People need to understand that.
Could I redirect you to my first question? If the referendum were to pass, would you guys consider other referendums in the future?
We would go back to the drawing board and...
If it does pass, we have nothing in the plate right now.
Well, let me give you an answer to that.
Yes.
That each Board of Education is a non-contiguous body, right?
Right.
So, the next
Right.
Board of Education is going to start in January, and then in January 2021, you'll have another Board of Education. Maybe the same people, but this board can't promise what the next board's going to do. It's impossible to do that. You might have, 3 years from now, you might have 9 different people. You're not going to, but you could in theory, and who knows what that board will do. So that's the best I can answer that.
So I think, if I can just say that some people have asked me, well, what does this mean for future referenda, like a new high school, for people who want a new high school? There is a debt ceiling that we can only borrow up to, which is a certain percentage of our school buildings, the cost of our school buildings, I think. The assessed value of our school buildings. So this does borrow against that and reduce that amount. So in other words, if we wanted to go build a state-of-the-art, incredible high school, and we have more people moving into town, and, do we want to build a $300 million high school? We wouldn't be able to afford that. Because I think the maximum debt right now is about $220 million. So this reduces what we can borrow in the future for a referendum.
Yes.
That is not the same as, it is this board's job, as has been stated numerous times, to bring things to the public to ensure quality education, safe buildings, and for our student body and our staff. So things may happen that require us to come out and go to referendum. With the 2% cap, and there are some agenda items on here, like our out-of-district placements, where we're spending over $3 million on 51 students. That, again, is not subject to the 2% cap, the transportation things. The last referendum was about us needing more money to be able to maintain programs and staff. That's not what this is about. This is about the debt side of it. So we are reducing our ability to borrow in the future by the $35 million. But we can't promise, not only because we don't know who's going to be here next year, we can't promise what comes up. What we can say is right now we don't have a plan for another referendum, and that all of these materials, all of these projects have been deemed important by these various groups that we have contracted to assess our buildings, as well as the state has said that they're worth 40%. And our bond counsel has said that all of these should last about 20, on average 20 years to deem them worthwhile to bond them for 20 years. So that's what we can say. But beyond that, we can't promise. We can't promise we're not going to come to referendum. At the same time, we can say we have no plans currently.
Okay. Chris?
I'd like to address two things I think came up from different people, but I'm going to ask Mr. LaPira to make sure I don't go astray when I do this. One thing, while this referendum effectively allows us, by the course of this referendum, if it passes, we are raising taxes. the net of the taxes to Mr. Gillette's point, they all go together at the end to generate a tax bill.
Correct.
But that increase in the tax bill does not increase the number that is used for the 2% cap.
Correct.
The debt service does not come into that. So this is not a way for us to make an end around to suddenly change the number that we take 2% from. These are fully separated, on my understanding, these are totally separate until it comes time to a tax bill.
Yes.
But everything about the accounting and everything is separated, and there's no crossover that allows us to leverage this to suddenly get a huge increase in our budget by taking 2% of a much larger number.
Correct.
It's still 2% of that regular operating, the general fund budget, not the debt service. Okay, so that was one point. The other point, I think, to the question, to this gentleman's question about what we do to try and convince people to help us out or encourage people to go out, we are not, as a public body, allowed to spend public money, with good reason, we're not allowed to spend public money to advocate for a position. We can spend that public money to provide information, which is what we do. We can certainly, as board members, go out and communicate and visit the different sites. We have that scheduled. But there is, to people who are asking, like, why don't you do more to try and get people to vote yes? We're not allowed to spend public money on advocating for a vote, of a certain vote. We can only use money to provide information. Like, we can pay for the posters, we can pay for the flyers to give information, but there are not things that we can do with public money to try and get the public to vote for us. So the idea is of why don't we do more to get the public to vote yes? Because we're not allowed to do those kinds of things where we would spend money to do it.
Correct. You can't use public money to send out a publication, for example, that says vote yes on the referendum. Everyone individually and even as a board can say vote yes on the referendum. When you talk to your neighbors and when you talk to your friends, you can certainly say that. We can say it right here, vote yes for the referendum, but we can't spend public funds on it to create materials or other types of things to advocate for the passage of a referendum. Right. Thank you.
But private citizens could.
Private citizens could. People want to spend their own money to send out flyers and say vote yes? Absolutely. They can do that.
Hey, I have a vote yes
Yard
sign
sign, sure.
from the Change in the Form of Government campaign of 2005. Anyway. Any other comments from the public? Board? Any more? Action agenda, yay. Or,
Yes, correct.
oh, they're not coming up to speak. Okay. Action agenda.
Superintendent recommends that the Board of Education approve the education agenda as follows: 12.1 to 12.9. Motion to affirm the superintendent's harassment, intimidation, and bullying determination. Motion to approve family math and family science sessions. Motion to approve common assessment development and overnight field trips. Motion to approve field trip destinations. Motion to approve submission of amendments with 2018-19 carryover from IDEA, and motion to approve submission of amendments with 2018-19 carryover from ESEA. Motion to approve school self-assessment for determining grades under the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights for 18-19, which, by the way, was presented at the August 26th Board of Education meeting. Motion to approve the 2019-20 out-of-district placements.
Okay, I'll take a motion and a second for items 12.1 through 12.9, please.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments about the education agenda?
Yes, I just had one question. Under the family math and family science program, I noticed that one of the elementary schools has 4 math but no science.
It's what the teachers choose.
Okay, so
And some schools, you'll notice, don't have any.
we are allowing for teachers then to facilitate that, or are they taking turns?
No, the teachers facilitate, and it's whatever the interest of the school community is what we'll do.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, and hopefully it could come up in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean, if somebody steps up to do it, it could be
absolutely.
on a future board agenda.
Are there more schools submitting things later in the year?
We haven't gotten them yet. We may get them.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I hope other teachers will step up.
Okay?
I have,
Yes.
I have a comment about the motion to approve overnight field trips. I do support both of them, but I do have some concerns about the band trip. It will, the purpose, I think it was to perform in exciting venues, but they will be missing 2 school days, so they'll be missing instruction in all of their classes. And especially, and I can't emphasize enough, I definitely support all of the music programs. They do a fantastic job. I just worry about the impact on the instruction in their other classes, especially when these same students they have other obligations, other band obligations that remove them from classroom instruction in their other classes. So I just wonder if we can explore other ways that they can satisfy such things, where they can perform closer, or maybe go on a trip where they're not missing school days, or just something that we can think about in the future.
I was saying this is overnight field trips, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And this one in particular has been somewhat of a tradition in the school district.
Yeah, I think this is a tradition, but I think what you might want to do is ask the superintendent to try to find out if there's been any negative impact, or if the students have felt they've been negatively affected in the past. We have plenty of, or if the teachers felt that the students were missing. Of course, the teachers are going to say no. They're going to say, she's going to say, no, the kids had a great time. They made up all their work. But I mean, maybe there'll be a way to find out.
Yeah, but there are also curricular elements that these trips involve.
Sure,
in terms of,
absolutely. No, they're educational in themselves, I'm sure.
Like real
Well,
audience.
like I said, it's not just this trip, it's because they're pulled out of classes for small group instruction, out of other classes. And I'm speaking from my own experience as a math teacher. It definitely, there were some students that were negatively impacted because they were pulled out, they missed classroom instruction many times due to...
For multiple activities.
Yes, either field trips or being pulled out of class for instruction. And I can't emphasize enough, I really do value it. I just want our students to not end up having negative consequences in their other classes.
Absolutely. Okay.
I was just going to say, our students that are, I don't know, failing, I guess nobody fails anymore. Everybody's getting a trophy, right? But if are the students that are failing, do they would they be prohibited from going on the Disney trip or something if they're not passing all their classes?
If there are concerns, it's certainly brought up and discussed, for
Okay.
sure.
All right. So you've got some things in place to make everything nice and good. All right, then you do your thing.
We do our best. We all do our
your thing.
best.
Do your thing then. I don't know what to do.
Okay, so any other questions or comments on the education agenda? We'll take a roll call.
Surely. Ms. Eldridge Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Gillette?
Yes.
Dr. Harris?
Yes.
Ms. Maroon?
Yes.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Yes.
Dr. Sussant?
Yes.
Mrs. Stats?
Yes.
Ms. Trujillo?
Yes.
Mrs. Haas?
Yes.
Motion passes.
The superintendent recommends that the Board of Education approve the Human Resources Agenda as follows: 13.1 to 13.11. Motion to approve the addendum to the employment agreement of the acting superintendent of schools. Motion to approve resignation. Motion to approve a revised mentor contract as well as a contract change. Motion to approve transfer, change in assignment, leaves of absence, and motion to approve appointments. We've already approved the interim science supervisor. Motion to approve winter and spring coaches and to pre-approve extra coverage. Motion to approve extra coverage, and motion to approve a revised sixth period coverage.
Okay, I'll take a motion for items 13.1 to 13.11, please.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on the,
I think there is
HR
a
agenda.
desire to separate, 13.8.
Yes. 13, yeah.
any other separates? Okay, so I'll take a vote on 13.1 through 13.7 and 13.9 through 13.11, please. Do I need a
No, you're
motion
good.
and second?
No, we're good.
Okay. So,
The roll call.
any questions on any of those? Roll call.
Ms. Eldridge Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Gillette?
Yes.
Dr. Harris?
Yes.
Mrs. Maroon?
Yes.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Yes.
Dr. Swasan?
Yes.
Mrs. Stats?
Yes.
Ms. Trujillo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Haas?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, and 13.8,
So moved?
second?
Second.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, roll call.
Ms. Eldridge Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Gillette?
Yes.
Dr. Harris?
No.
Mrs. Maroon?
Abstain.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Yes.
Dr. Swasan?
Abstain.
Mrs. Stats?
Yes.
Mrs. Trujillo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Haas?
Abstain.
Motion passes.
It takes a whole hand to get there.
Superintendent recommends that the Board of Education approve the operations agenda as follows: 14.1 to 14.2, motion to appoint the Public Agency Compliance Officer, and motion to approve the non-public expenditure resolution.
Okay, I'll take a motion and a second for items 14.1 and 14.2.
So moved.
Thank you. Second. Thank you. Any questions or comments? If not, I'll have our Paco give a roll call.
Paco's ready.
Go Paco.
All right, Ms. Eldridge Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Gillette?
Yes.
Dr. Harris?
Yes.
Mrs. Maroon?
Yes.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Yes.
Dr. Swasan?
Yes.
Mrs. Stats?
Yes.
Ms. Trujillo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Haas?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Are we
We
good?
just have our informational enrollment suspension report, final crisis drills, and our HIB review, as typical.
Okay. And are there any other comments from the board or public? Yes.
So I'm looking ahead at the calendar of board meetings. On December 23rd, we are scheduled to have a board meeting. There is no school that day. So that is the start of, actually the Friday before that is the start of winter break. So I'll make a motion, people can amend it if they wish, that we have the meeting on the 9th as scheduled and cancel the meeting on the 23rd.
Okay.
And move it to another day?
We can move it to another day if people want, but we certainly shouldn't have it on the 23rd. I don't know if people want to have two meetings in December. It's usually generally a pretty busy month. If we want to have two prior to the board meeting, to the referendum, or have one on one side and one on the other.
Well, I would just ask Mrs. San Giuliano over here, if December 9th, it is the end of the year too, so would December, we're down to one accounts payable person. We used to have two. She's doing twice the amount of work. Will she be able to close out like November by December 9th? That's pretty tough. That's the reason we always have a meeting towards the second half of the month for the financials, to pay the bill from the, so what do you think? What do you think there, kid?
Mr. Mahmood, the business administrator, and I have discussed this, and we believe that we would be able to get a bills list on at December 9th, should the board choose to have that as the last board meeting in December.
Great answer. That's a great answer.
Yes.
I like that.
When the referendum passes, will we need to take any actions on the 16th that we should take to before the whatever day in January is the next week?
I spoke to Hyman about that this afternoon, and he said no.
Okay.
Just affirmed.
Yes.
We're good.
Are there any other questions?
I
or
do.
how people
I
feel
advocate for a second meeting in December, and I suggest December 16th, just to have it, because we typically do during the school year have two meetings. I would like to continue that practice, just for the sake of the public. If there's any comments that they would like to express to us, it could be a short meeting, but I still think that we ought to have a second meeting rescheduled. That would be my vote.
For the 16th.
Whoa. 16th?
You just got electrocuted.
Okay.
I advocate for December 16th.
Okay.
Will we get paid?
Do we get for
Come on,
extra
just-
hours?
I think we get double time if we reschedule, right?
Right? No, we would get our pay deducted for only having
Yeah.
one meeting, right?
Get our holiday
From
bonus.
0 to 0. Is there any further comment on that?
So they'll
How
be
does
back to
everybody
back
feel?
on the 9th and the 16th.
Well, that's
Right?
Mr. Trujillo's proposal.
Okay.
Is that-
Yeah, does anyone?
We've
so-
done that before, 2 weeks in a row.
So figure
It's
out,
going to be back to back.
Well, the
9th
reason-
and
That would
the
be her,
reason-
that would be her proposal.
Well, nobody made a motion, we were just discussing it?
Yes.
Is that right?
discussing it.
So the next meeting in November is November 25th, so I would say that December 2nd would make 3 back-to-back meetings, in which case, I think that December 9th, December 16th would be reasonable, given that December 23rd is no school. So, would you like to make the motion? Or shall
I made the motion to cancel it, so I.
Did you make, but you didn't get a second, did you?
No, I made a motion and opened it for discussion.
I believe the, go ahead.
so you need to, so you have 2 competing proposals. But what I would do is, the first one you talked about was having a motion to cancel it, right? And not replace it with a second meeting.
Did someone second that?
No one seconded that.
All right.
So, you can make them, so either one of these motions can be made now. If anyone seconds it, you can go ahead and then vote on it. And then if that one doesn't pass, then the next alternative, right, would be to move the December 23rd meeting to December 16th. So my, you could, if no one wants to cancel, right, then you could just do the second motion. Yes. Yeah.
I make a motion to,
I don't think, sorry, but we
have
have
a
to address,
motion.
we have to address the motion on the table first.
No, she didn't.
We either second it or withdraw it or kill
Is
it.
anyone going to second that motion to cancel and not have a second meeting?
Everybody wants it, but nobody wants to say it.
Go right ahead, Greg.
Everybody
Well,
wants something. They want, which one?
Yeah, I think everybody,
one?
except for Jean, right?
I think we should have a second.
Are you seconding the motion?
No, I was actually, as you heard me say here, I actually was advocating
Okay.
to lighten the load of our accounts payable clerk.
Yes.
To have it on the
Okay.
16th, so I'm actually with Jean.
Okay. Is anyone other than the 3 people who spoke about it going to second that motion to cancel? Yes, no? Sounds like a no. Okay, so then if that's the case, Jean, do you want to, you're making your motion.
so I make a motion to move the December 23rd Board of Education meeting to Monday, December 16th, 2019.
I'll
Have a
second.
second for that.
I'll second.
Okay. So now you can vote on
You
that.
can still vote no, people.
What's that?
You can still vote
You
no.
can still vote no, and you're going to be here on the 23rd, that's fine. No, I mean, I didn't mean it to be sarcastic, I mean.
No, but
like,
we
that's-
didn't cancel the
that's
23rd,
result.
so if we don't
haven't
do this,
canceled it.
we're here
Yes.
on the 23rd.
Correct, correct. That came out weird, I didn't mean it.
No, I got you.
And we don't need a third motion on this subject, so let's get this straight.
Well, let all of our issues be this,
Yes.
difficult. Okay, so, roll call?
Sure.
Yes.
Ms. Eldridge Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Gillette?
Yes.
Dr. Harris?
Yes.
Mrs. Maroon?
Yes.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Yes.
Dr. Swasan?
I'm going to abstain because I can't make the 16th. I'll be going to Hawaii.
Okay. All right. Miss-
I love it, I love it.
Just to inform, yes, you can all meet.
Right, yeah,
I just want
that's it.
everybody informed that I
Yeah,
will
rub all our
be-
faces in
got
it,
you.
yeah. We'll be in the snow, you'll be in the
Anybody
sand.
else?
Mrs.
Would you
Mrs.
prefer to have the meeting on Sunday?
Wait, he's still
or-
doing the roll call.
Let's go.
I don't think
Whatever
I
day
can
you have
continue
the
if
meeting,
the-
I
Wait
will
a
leave
second,
that
we're not supposed to
day.
editorialize during roll call.
Mrs. Stats?
Yes.
Ms. Trujillo?
Yes.
Mrs. Hobbs?
Yes.
Motion passed.
All right.
Yay. Any other comments from the public? That was me.
This time.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure, but is this the second public topic?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I believe that sometime this week, the elementary school HSA parent presidents and maybe other ones are going to be happening this week. It sounds like maybe tomorrow. I just would hope that they would openly share with each other what the schools, each of their schools do and what they have done in the past. And if they have space for some of their programs, that all of the community is invited to join in. I have gone to a wonderful thing that Woods Road put on. It was outside. They had face painting, lots of different booths. and the Alliance, and it was lovely. I've been to 3 schools' science fairs, all terribly lovely. I see on the thing at 12.2 that some schools have teachers who are willing to do family math and science sessions. I don't know if other schools are going to do that, and that'll come up in other agendas. Maybe I've missed it. But if they haven't, I would strongly encourage the schools that are doing it to publicize it so that everyone can join in if they would like to. It's a little bit of an equality type thing. Maybe people aren't going to be interested even if they are made aware of it. But I think that's important because eventually all the kids will come together in the same schools once they reach ARIS and beyond. And I just think it's important. Another thing, I should have come up earlier, but on your website, just for people who haven't looked at it yet, you need to poke around a little bit to find the information, but the information is there. That includes frequently asked questions. The last I looked, it was 28 points that you could open up, each individual one, a tax calculator, meeting, a request to, you could request a meeting. If you can't make one of the other facility tours and meetings that they also have listed, they also have information about the New Jersey State senior tax freeze information, and I think that's important. It'd be nice if they would be able to incorporate some of the pictures into the website, and hopefully that will be forthcoming. And I think that's about it.
Tonight's presentation will be also on that website.
And if you wanted to have a video about this, I would suggest that you have a shortened video that could be said in like 3 to 5 minutes, because people's attention spans are very small. Nowadays, a lot of them will not take the time to poke around to figure out that you need to go from here to there, and then you have to open up on this other section. But the information is there if you look for it. I guess that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I have one more comment.
Yes.
But I wanted to, we're having a very nice time tonight, so I really don't want to have a I just want to kind of bring something up in addressing your point, Mrs. Haas, earlier, when you talked about 80% of our budget is salary and benefits, and the health benefits are kind of out of our control, and so is transportation and special education. I really hope that at the next board meeting that we can have a discussion from this board as to how we're going to address next school year's budget. At the April 29th, 2019 Board of Ed meeting, we passed the budget, and I remember that Dr. Harris had said that we need to look at next year's budget like immediately. And I really feel that the 9 of us need to talk about what the priorities are, because blaming the state, and I mean, like, we are, the situation that we are handed, what we have has been handed to us, but that doesn't change the reality of it. We need to deal with it. And I think that what we did in the April 2019 budget, doing like basically a trim all across the board, was not necessarily in the community's and the students' best interest. So I really would hope that the 9 of us would think about how we can address this. I mean, I know like we do it in committee, but also to talk about it in public so that the community members can hear our thoughts, and then also have a starting point in which to weigh in. Because we know a lot of stuff, but we don't really share it here because we've talked about it all in committee, and that there's a lot of minutia, there's a lot of that stuff. But I think that the community has a lot of great ideas. They just don't know where to start. Like, what is possible, right? So you did talk about like salaries and benefits are the largest portion of the budget, but that means that all programs stay the same, right? So there are programs that maybe the board may say, if we're rank ordering them, we're going to unfortunately have to eliminate, X, Y, and Z at the very bottom of the list. And that's what I'd like to talk about, hopefully at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I'll
If
just
not,
respond to that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's, we are taking comments from the public and the board on the budget, so any board member is free to address that at any meeting. I think it's, important for the committees to be able to do their work and review with all of the professionals who are not here. I know Education Committee has a special education presentation, a technology, and a curriculum and instruction presentation. We're going to start those presentations soon. And it's also important for us to have the details before we start talking about programs, the details about what funds will be available to pay for those programs. And we all have to remember that, the discussion that we had this year when we, unfortunately had to let so many people go, that even if you get rid of a language, those students have to go someplace. So you're not necessarily saving any money unless you have underrepresented classes. So, I think until we actually see what is, how the budget looks with respect to state aid and surplus and all of those things, we could talk about what our priorities are and what the will of the board is. I mean, I think, given what happened last year, my priority is not to fire anybody. And beyond that, I don't know that we are going to be able to do much with respect to specificity until we see actual numbers. But of course, anybody can, should feel free to give their priorities. I really don't want to get into a big public debate about what we want when we don't know whether or not we can afford it, because I can give you 10 things that I want that I know we can't afford. So it really is useless information until you know how you look financially. I mean, it's like when I go grocery shopping, I know I have $200 to spend. That means I'm not buying lobster. I don't buy lobster anyway. I'm allergic to it. But that means if I have to, I'm going to do what I have to do. So I think it might be a little premature to talk about priorities until we actually get some direction from the professionals about what we have to work with.
Yes, and quite honestly, we have gotten some of that direction already. In terms of, what our issues will be financially next year if everything stays the same. I mean, you start out with if everything starts the same. But as Lorraine said, we have a whole bunch of things coming up in relation to a settlement and a benefits decision and, potential, increase in benefits costs, and whether or not our class sizes issues go over, acceptable levels. And I think before we look for other things to deal with, we have to sort of look at the basics. And I think we need to see if this referendum passes. And there's just a lot of ifs out there right now. And I would like to acknowledge that Dr. Antunes sent a letter out to everybody in our district in regard to writing to the state and, trying to get legislators to help us in some ways. We had a meeting that was scheduled, which will have to be rescheduled with our state legislators, and we're going to, continue to pursue that. I think we need to first look at what the basic status of our budget is once we have some of these answers.
Good.
And, that being said, I welcome any discussion on priorities, which we could have at any time. I mean, when we talk about, general comments from the board at the end of a board meeting, feel free to comment on any priorities that you might have. That's what the second, comment period is for. So
we now have comment periods on public and board input on the budget. So that's actually at the beginning. So that's actually part of more.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we can talk about priorities of, I guess from 2 points of view. We can talk about priorities of what we want to make sure stays in the budget. And also maybe okay, we have to cut something, what would be, our worst case scenario, what we would cut. But I think we can have that discussion before we know specifics. We have to plan for these things, and it's all based on having a discussion of priorities.
Okay, do you have any issue with that, Vic? I mean,
Until you form the budget, until you actually formulate the budget, you're just having discussion about what your priorities are. And
Well-
nothing is binding.
yes, but, people might get concerned, like if people talk about, eliminating this program or eliminating this subject.
And there's one teacher, and teaches that.
Yeah.
And then we have that same
Yeah, I
problem
would- I
again.
would-
And we
even
can't
if
talk
it-
about anything. It's kind of ridiculous, actually.
I would preface everything by, you can have discussion about ideas, about ways in which you could save money or what
Well,
programs.
the idea is to
appropriate.
eliminate Latin, and there's one teacher. I'm just thinking, well,
Right.
do
There
we
you
actually
go.
have Latin?
There
We
you
do.
go.
All right, to eliminate
Sports.
Portuguese.
Sports.
And there's only one teacher that teaches Portuguese.
Right.
And then we can never have that discussion, because someone will say, you're talking about someone's future, you're hurting their feelings. Well, I don't know, whatever.
Well,
But you are.
if you want to eliminate a whole
Can't we do that?
program,
Are we allowed to do that?
You can talk about programs, you can't talk about staff members.
Okay.
But yes, the implication is that,
Okay.
right, some people may think, well, I'm the only person that teaches that, so they're going to eliminate my job.
but if you're eliminating a whole program, whether there's one person or 10, that's still people, so
Yeah.
Correct.
And those
the
people
number
may
of
bump
people
out
really
somebody
doesn't
Oh,
matter.
correct,
I mean,
I know. I know.
matters,
You know how it goes.
Yeah.
Well, you'll find out.
But anyway, you have to be careful.
You're getting
because
there, you're getting there.
There could be unanticipated consequences of those discussions, especially when they're premature.
It's all preliminary.
So,
Everything is
you know,
preliminary until you
Sort of have to balance that, and that's why we do these
Yeah, but I
things
know what
initially in
Jan's
committee.
I guess I want to clarify, though, because I've been hearing that where the board is tasked with giving direction as to what should be in the budget. And so that I think part of that would be talking about priorities.
Yeah,
to-
I mean,
to
general
give direction.
priorities are fine.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about specific positions, you run into issues.
Sure.
But I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think it's broad priorities, and the biggest issue that I have is that last year, in October 2018, the board was told that once the tentative budget is struck, 6 weeks until the final budget, there was plenty of time to make changes. And then, come to find out, there really wasn't very much time to make changes. It was pretty much, well, if we wanted to eliminate X, Y, and Z program, we needed to discuss it in committee in much, much further detail, and that would take a year. So that we really could not make any changes that we had suggested.
Well,
So
you have
that's
to
why
make
I'm-
changes based on facts, too. So we have to have enough time for our administrators, like, if you want to change something about, let's say, a sports program, and, we need people to advise us in terms of what each sport is costing us now, what are the facility issues involved, what are ancillary costs, what are booster clubs contributing to it. I mean, nothing's simple.
Exactly, and that's why I want to have that conversation now, so that the board can discuss amongst itself, kind of like what we did in RVCC, like a committee of the whole, where the 9 of us are talking with each other, to each other, having that conversation, and kind of the best ideas or the most, the ideas that resonate with the majority of us kind of percolate to the top, that we can give direction to administrators to price it out kind of thing and figure out if it's viable.
I just have to disagree in the fact that I think it's administrators that should be coming to us with the information. I don't, who are we to say, well, this program should be eliminated? We don't have that information. I don't think that's part of our job, is to fish through and to just based on what we think is the best thing to eliminate. I just don't think that's our job as a board member. I think we can look through and have discussion, but I don't think we should be doing that in any way in public. And I think it's up to the students and the teachers and the administrators to bring the ideas to us first.
So then can we have our field services rep come to the next board meeting and talk to our field services rep from NJSBA, come to the next board meeting to discuss this with us? Because I think I could be missing, I may not understand my role properly. I would like to have it clarified so that the 9 of us are on the same page as to how the budget process works and what our role as a board member is.
Would you like
Who
to
was
address
the person that was there
Gwen
in August?
Thornton.
Gwen Thornton, right. So I think Gwen pointed out at that meeting, when she was going over the the ideas and the roles of board members and what you can do and what you can't do, is the board's role is to come up with the general policy determinations, and I think, if I remember her comments exactly, I think she said, so it's up to the board to figure out, what they want, and then the how is determined by the administration who makes those recommendations. So, we want to make sure that we have quality sports programs. That's the what, right? The how is figuring out what those programs are going to be. Not necessarily board members saying, I think we should have, more focus on football or more focus on, field hockey or whatever it is. So, big picture issues, yes, that's what the board is supposed to do. That's your role. Details, that's the administration's role to give you the information and then make proposals with regard to that. I think that was what Gwen had said at that meeting.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
that's
and that's what I was trying to
that's the
get at,
concept.
with like the big picture instead of getting into the nitty-gritty of, yeah.
But I think, if I could, to your question, Jean, I think you, in your beginning, you gave an example of, if I had to cut certain programs, these are the ones that are lowest priority to me. I think and I don't know where exactly the line would be drawn, but I think for us to start discussing very specific programs goes beyond what Mr. Lapierre was just describing, what Gwen said. So I think the idea of us saying we want to, let's say we as a group said we want to cut back on world language, we could say that. I don't think we should say, to Greg's example, we don't want Portuguese anymore. I think that's where we're getting too specific in terms of the board providing direction. The board's direction should be at a higher level than us pick and choosing a language or a specific program, a specific narrow program that we say we don't want this anymore, because that is something at that level. It should be the administration saying, well, if you want to diminish your world language program, the best way to do that is here, not for us to say, get rid of Portuguese. So I think somewhere near there's between us having a discussion about world language versus us having a discussion about Portuguese. That's where I think we cross that line about how detailed, and I hope, does anybody here speak Portuguese?
I understand that, but I want to refer back in 2017, when we added 3 guidance counselors to elementary schools. We had a very specific discussion on the dais about adding 3 guidance counselors to the elementary schools. That was the board saying, we value mental health in schools, and we want the administration to find the funds to create those 3 positions. We did that, 2017. It was February 2017. So
I would say, but that timing is to me is the difference. You didn't discuss doing that in October, November. You discussed it in February when you had the beginnings of a budget, and you said, you know what, we want to change the budget this way. I'm just assuming, based on the way the calendar works, that if you had that discussion in February, you had some modicum of budget idea in front of you, and you said, we want to tweak this. And I think it's appropriate at that time to say, we want to make that change. I think for us to start saying now that this is the thing I insist we do in the budget, or this is my singular priority or set of priorities at this point, without enough information from the public. I don't have a problem with discussing high-level priorities, but to me that's exactly the example, that a more specific change like that happens in the February-March timeframe and not the November timeframe.
Right, so my biggest priority is don't cut math.
One at a time. I think, let's get everybody before.
Can I just say that we can't decapitate the committee process either.
Correct.
So if you have something that education or HR, you're on operations, should be evaluating, then you should refer to the chair of the committee and say, this is a priority for me, or if you are considering XYZ, then please consider this. But the committee process should happen and before we go out and exacerbate something in the public. I mean, especially because we have a referendum coming out, somebody could make an offhanded comment that won't be agreed upon broadly, but could get 500 people coming to the the microphone to talk to us about it, and could actually adversely affect the referendum. Not that I'm trying to obfuscate or not be transparent, but I think there is a time for transparency, and that's when the committee has had a time to review things. report out to the board and say, listen, we're being recommended XYZ by the administration. Is this something we want to do? Or we need cuts in these, potentially in these programs. Is that the will of the board? I don't want to decapitate the committee process, and I don't want people, uninformed out of committee to be giving opinions that don't represent what the discussions have been in committee. I think it gets very, very difficult when there is information given to a committee. Every board member has access to that and should review it. When operations comes out, I look at operations. If I have any questions, I get in touch with Greg. That is the way we do it.
You got my number.
So, yeah, I have texted you. So, I think that's what we commit to as board members. And what I don't want to do is in, November or December, which is way too early for the administration to have provided us with any information, for us to start having broad conversations, even broad conversations, but certainly specific conversations, that would be counterproductive to the committee process or to the public and incite a public riot. With all of our addresses are listed. We could have a bunch of people standing outside our door at any time.
So Dr. Soissons, are you saying then it would be okay to have these kinds of conversations in committee?
Absolutely.
Prioritizing, et cetera?
It's absolutely appropriate. And it's absolutely appropriate, Jane, you're not on education, for you to refer something to the education committee, an idea you had or something for us to talk about. That's absolutely appropriate. Because we need input into our committee process. So when something is reviewed, I know for education we will get 3 presentations, curriculum instruction, and all of those will be up a week before we have a committee meeting. And maybe it would be advisable for Kate, I know she has a lot of work to do, but if she just emails out the backup materials for education is up, the backup materials, budget backup materials only is up, so that everybody has those and can review them and please get to, I'm happy to talk to you at any time and present whatever ideas you have to education for consideration, and folding that into the feedback we give there. And then when we put it together, certainly have discussions with the committee of the whole. But I think committee of the whole discussions too early could be counterproductive to our purpose.
I agree. And honestly, I think it's also important, given, how little administrative staff we have going into the budget process. The committee system at least ensures that there are a number of board members who are interested in a particular issue. And I really don't think that our administrators should be like responding to 9 individual people about what each of those people want, because they never respond on the basis of an opinion. They respond on the basis of what's necessary to give our kids the best possible education. So there is curricular research that needs to be done. There's financial research that needs to be done. There might be trade-offs that need to be made. The case of the additional guidance counselors that were added, at that time, we're having a horrible problem in our schools servicing the kids who are having issues. There seemed to be a real spike in terms of the number and of the location in terms of the grade level of that. And even though that was brought up at a board meeting, we had to come back and identify where the money was going to come from. And back then, we actually had money that we could apply, prioritize for that purpose. I'm not sure we have very much in the way of those kinds of options anymore.
We do not.
So I'm very happy that we got to do that, but that was really the exception and not the rule. And especially in the times we're dealing with now. So I would just ask that everybody be respectful of the time of our, administrative staff. They have an awful lot on their plate right now and going forward. And, let's at least discuss this in committee, at the onset and see what we come up with. But
So-
yes, the committee reports can be more robust.
Yeah.
But at least let's be sure that, at least 3 people are thinking in terms of heading in that direction.
So using the example of the guidance counselors, if we could have gone back in time, would it have been appropriate for that to have been a discussion at this time of year in committee to express, hey, we want to have guidance counselors in every grade school?
I would say, if there was data, an experience that showed that our current guidance counselors weren't handling their workload, their number of caseload, their number of students, we'd have to discuss it. But unfortunately, we always have to discuss things in terms of, well, if you want to hire another guidance counselor, you might have to remove another position.
I remember somebody talking about that in February 2017.
What's that?
I remember somebody talking about that in February 2017.
Yes.
Except we were on opposite sides of that equation at that point. I remember
Actually,
that.
there were only 5 of us, and we all voted yes.
No, I got you, but I mean, I remember I was sitting there and Mr. Mahmood was saying, well, Mrs. Haas, what would you propose to change to get those guidance counselors in there? But I see you've realized.
I had an answer at that
yes,
point.
I see you've realized how it works.
I had an answer that day too. The administration came back with a different answer.
Motion to adjourn.
I hear you. Any objections? Please say no.
Somebody second.
Second.
Okay, hallelujah. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Go home.